All right, folks, this is Homer Hickam continuing to read for all of us shut-ins during the great COVID-19 coronavirus quarantine slash sequestering that a lot of us, if not most of us, are now caught up in. And just wanted to see if I could entertain a few folks. And so I'm reading a few chapters, or actually one part, from my novel, Carrying Albert Home, the somewhat true story of a man, his wife, and his alligator. So I'm reading this late at night, and if you hear a cat screeching, that's our cat Yazzie, who is deaf, or deaf, as they say in New Zealand. And and he came from St. John. He's a feral cat and completely deaf and completely crazy too. So you may hear him yelling like he's in pain or happy or sad or whatever, but he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just having fun. He's well fed. He's well taken care of. So that's our Yazzie. As you may recall from my previous readings, Homer is has been forced to join the Coast Guard, and he's on the Coast Guard cutter Helene, and they're chasing down the Theodosia, a smuggler's ship. Elsie has taken over the Dorothy Howard with Captain Bob, and is out on the ocean looking for Homer and mostly Albert. And so that's where we are, and I'm going to pick up with chapter 33. And it starts with Elsie, Captain Bob, and on the Dorothy Howard. All through the night, the Dorothy wandered across the sea. If there was anything to see, it was not seen. But that did not deter Elsie, who peered into the gloom for any sign of life, any splash that might indicate a struggling husband or beloved alligator. The rooster, who had rushed across the plank at the last second, stood on the bow, looking fiercely into the darkness. Nothing was seen. See? I told you were going to get in on this. So, all right. Okay. All right. Slowly. There you go. All right. When the sun peeped above the horizon and the gulls rose from the sea to greet the newborn day, though she looked until her eyes were raw, Elsie could still see nothing except the everlasting sea. Until Marley called out, Marley's the mate, Marley called out, "There's what looks like a body over there." A lump rose in Elsie's throat as Captain Bob steered his boat alongside. Marley, his face screwed up in fear, dead men afloat were surely bad juju, turned it over to find its face chewed off by sharks. "It is not Homer," Elsie declared after willing herself to look. "Well, I don't need to see his face to know him," Captain Bob said. "See that tattoo of a duck on the back of his hand? It's Merganser Finney from up Myrtle Beach way. He comes from a long line of beach trash." Don't go talking about the dead that way, Captain Bob," Marley cried, making secret signs with his hands to ward off the spirit of the man still bobbing in the sea. "Set Merganser back adrift," Captain Bob directed. "His kin won't care, and there won't be nobody wanting to bury him. It'll be left to us, and I'm in no mood to dig a grave nor find a preacher to stand over it." "Don't you dare push him away," Elsie said. "He is still a man and deserves respect." Captain Bob looked grim but nodded reluctant agreement. Marley, after gulping several times, caught the body with a boat hook and with Elsie's help hauled it in to sprawl on the deck. An eel of some type crawled out of the cadaver's ear and wriggled across the deck and threw the scupper into the sea. "It don't take long before the treasures of the ocean, the creatures of the ocean, make anything their home and hearth," Marley marveled, making more secret signs. Elsie went below, fetched a tarp, and covered the body. The rooster came over and looked up at Elsie with an inquiring expression on its beaked face. "What is it, Rooster?" she demanded, and then noticed the boat was aimed toward shore and making headway. She turned to Captain Bob. "What do you think you're doing?" "Why, taking Merganser to the beach, Elsie. That's what you wanted when you had him brought aboard. Is it not true?" "It is not true." "Turn us around and keep looking. I have a hunch this man had something to do with what's happened to Homer. Besides that, you're responsible for my husband going overboard, him and Albert, and I won't have you give up the search so easily." When Captain Bob resolutely kept churning toward shore, Elsie marched up beside him and pulled back the throttle. The engine groaned, then died. "You are a crazy female," Captain Bob said. He tried to start the engine, but it only sputtered. "Now you've done it. We're adrift with a dead body." "It will begin to stink, Miss Elsie," Marley explained, nodding toward the covered body. "Stink until high heaven, such that you will never take a breath without thinking of that stink." "I am willing to chance that, Marley," Elsie answered resolutely. "Now, Captain Bob, stop playing games with me. You are deliberately pretending not to be able to start the engine just to scare me." "Well, I'm not scared. Do I have to go after my pistol?" "Hark!" Marley called, a hand cupped to an ear. "Did you hear that?" Elsie and Captain Bob both cocked their ears toward the open sea. "Gunfire," Captain Bob said. "And a volume of it, too," Marley said. "Who declared war, I wonder?" "Has to be that crazy bastard Captain Wolf." Elsie faced the gunfire. "They're there," she said. "I know they are. We have to go see." "We're not going anywhere," Captain Bob said. "Captain Wolf is as crazy a gent who ever donned Coast Guard blue. He starts his boys shooting. There's no way we dare run up on him. Bullets will be flying everywhere." Elsie squinted toward the noise of the battle, and then pulled Captain Bob aside. "You've admired me, Captain Bob, and made no secret of that. I presume if I'm a widow, you'll take that as an advantage. But how are we to know if we don't have a look?" Captain Bob narrowed his eyes. "Are you saying that there might be room for me in your heart if, in fact, your husband is gone?" "It is well known," Elsie replied, "that a woman uncertain of her widowhood can go years spurning all other men for no other reason than she must be sure of her status. I call to your attention Penelope, who waited 20 years for Ulysses." "20 years, madam? Such is the lot of the uncertain spouse." Elsie batted her eyes. Captain Bob quivered with outrage. "I shan't wait so long." Elsie pointed toward the ever-increasing barrage of gunfire. "There might be the answer to your prayers and mine." Captain Bob cranked the engine, which started up immediately. He steered the Dorothy away from shore and toward the noise of battle, the rooster once more taking up a position on the bow. "Oh, Captain, my Captain," Marley wailed, "we're in for it now." Chapter 34. "There, lads, it's the quarry," Captain Wolf shouted to his assembled Coast Guardsmen, "and the glory I know you've always wanted." Well, I didn't use my Captain Wolf voice there, but I'll get to it. "There, lads, it's the quarry." That kind of thing. His crew stared at him with uncertainty. Most of them were just boys who... By the way, I sat beside Buzz Aldrin when Vice President Pence gave a speech that we're going back to the moon in 2024. And Buzz wasn't hearing that well that day, the way the vice president, the direction he was talking, and Buzz would occasionally, and I'm using Buzz's voice for Captain Wolf. Homer, what'd the vice president say?" "He says we're going back to the moon, Buzz." "Oh, good." "In 2024. "What?" 2024. "Oh, that's going to be hard." "I think you're right." Anyway, okay, so now I've lost my place. Anyway, so I'm going to start right at the start. "There, lads, it's the quarry," Captain Wolf shouted to his assembled... Wait, I'm still not using his voice. All right, here we go. "There, lads, it's the quarry," Captain Wolf shouted to his assembled... I'm going to get through this sentence yet. "There, lads, it's the quarry," Captain Wolf shouted to his assembled Coast Guardsmen, "and the glory I know you've always wanted." Not perfect, but all right, I got it out. Right, you get that? Captain Wolf's crazy. All right, I wrote him crazy because he is crazy. His crew stared at him with uncertainty. Most of them were just boys who'd left their mother's arms for the promise of being paid on a regular basis or had been jerked awake after being found asleep on the beach and pressed into the service of an armed force of the American federal government. Their training consisted entirely of service aboard the Helene. They knew nothing of glory or even much about the rifles and cartridge bags that Chief Ventnor had given a few of them. Cutlasses, knives, and brass knuckles had also been handed out. They looked at their implements of war with more curiosity than eagerness. Captain Wolf was not unaware of the situation. "Now, boys, most of you have never been in combat, but that don't change the fact that you're American fighting men. Once in battle, you'll get the hang of it. Chief, make sure our lads know how to load and fire their rifles. The rest of you, swipe the blade or bash them in the teeth. Nothing to it." Chief Ventnor showed those who had been issued a rifle how to load it. "Aim carefully, fellas, and pull your triggers only when you have the enemy in your sights." Homer, observing all this, was wondering if he was expected to fight. All he had in his hands was a mop. He scanned the deck, noting several hatches that led below. Accordingly, he set his sights on the nearest of them, but was caught up short by Chief Ventnor. "Here now, recruit," the chief said, taking Homer by the neck of his shirt. "Where do you think you're going?" He broke off the working end of Homer's mop and handed the handle back to him. "There, a staff good as Little John ever used to knock down Robin Hood. You'll join the assault, boy, even though it will be against your friends in the trade." "They're not my friends," Homer said. He looked at the mop handle and wondered what he was supposed to do with it. "What about the crocodile?" one of the men asked. Chief Ventnor seized on the remarks. "Aye, lad, our lucky charm, the croc of the sea. Give praise and thanks. We have the fierce creature with us, for no one can deny us victory with, He leaned in close to Homer and asked out of the corner of his mouth, "What's his name?" Homer allowed himself a quick sigh. "Albert, and he's an alligator, not a crocodile." "Albert," Ventnor cried. "Albert the crocodile will lead us to victory. Who shall carry him across?" He pointed at the boy. "You, Doogie. You and the former smuggler will carry Albert across to the Theodosia, and then we shall all follow and smite them, yea, to victory." "Huzzah for Albert!" a crewman yelled out. "Huzzah!" came back the answering cry from the rest of the Coast Guardsmen. "Three cheers for our crocodile! Rah, rah, rah!" "You men," Captain Wolf shouted from aft the bridge, "prepare yourself. We shall be on the enemy in a nonce." You know what a nonce is? Yeah, it's a short period of time, a nonce. It's the word I kind of like. It should be used more often. You know, I'm going to the grocery store. I'll be back in a nonce. I'd like for everybody to listen to this. Use nonce in a sentence at least once during the next day, which I know is going to be kind of hard since you're not going anywhere. But if you got a cat or a dog, you can say, go to the litter box in a nonce. Well, that probably won't work. But anyway, you get what I'm getting at. All right, use nonce. It's a word. It's a good word. Although none of the Coast Guard crew had the slightest idea what a nonce was. Well, see, even when I wrote this, I was using an interesting word, like prodigious in a rocket voice. Although none of the Coast Guard crew had the slightest idea what a nonce was, apparently the smugglers did, as the Theodosia suddenly came about. From her bow came a puff of smoke, followed by a sharp crack and a whistle and a thrum of the air as something heavy and very fast flew over the Helene. Chief Ventnor raced forward as the rest of the crew dropped to the deck. "I see a smoke ring. They have a cannon on board, Captain. Get up, you swine, get up, I say." He turned to the bridge. "Faster, Captain Wolf, faster, so we may close with these things and destroy their terrible machine." Captain Wolf raised an eyebrow at the chief's theatrics, then went back inside the wheelhouse to take the wheel himself. "Horatio Nelson said it best, my lad," he advised the crewman just relieved of the wheel. "No fancy maneuvers, just go straight at 'em." "Horatio who, sir?" said the crewman. "Oh, the greatest admiral in history, even though he was a G.D. limey." Captain Wolf yelled just as a cannonball smashed into the bridge, punching a hole fore and aft. Captain Wolf turned to look at the holes and then noticed the crewman lying on the deck. "You all right, lad? Your eyes are as wide as a hooked swordfish." "I'm okay, sir," the crewman said as he slowly picked himself up. "Then arm yourself. We're about to collide with the smuggler." "Collide, sir?" the crewman asked, just as the collision occurred, knocking him back to the deck. The bridge tilted crazily, and Captain Wolf staggered for a moment, threw open a locker, and pulled out a cutlass before stomping out on the flying bridge. "At 'em, men," he yelled, waving the cutlass. "Show 'em the spirit of the United States Coast Guard." What came next was complete confusion. Shots were fired, and the Coast Guardsmen ran to and fro, uncertain what they were supposed to do. "At 'em, lads!" Captain Wolf kept yelling from the bridge, but his men hung back, not exactly certain what "at 'em" entailed. Chief Ventnor, seeing his hapless crew so confused, took Albert away from Doogie and tossed him across to the Theodosia. When Albert landed, he snapped his jaws at the smugglers, who took one look and ran. "Follow our crocodile!" Ventnor screamed. The Coast Guardsmen still hesitated until Homer, worried for Albert, jumped across the space between the two boats. A smuggler tried to cut him down with a machete, and he used the mop handle like a baseball bat, knocking the machete from the man's hands and then whacking him hard on the head. The man dropped like a sack of beans. The other smugglers shrunk back from the formidable pair suddenly in their midst. "Follow the recruit and the crocodile," Chief Ventnor demanded. This time, seeing the good example of both Homer and Albert, the Coast Guardsman rose up and leaped onto the smuggler's deck like a flying wave of humanity. The battle was quick and bloody, although not particularly deadly, because most of the smugglers instantly dropped their weapons and gave up the ship. This was fortunate, seeing as how the Theodosia was hopelessly holed by the Helene's bow and was already settling in the water. Two of the smugglers, however, did not give up. They advanced on Homer, their machetes raised. One of the men was very big, and one was very small. To his amazement, Homer recognized them both. Slick? Huddy? Is it really you? So I've got these two guys. In almost every part, not every part, but almost every part of this story, there's a couple of bad guys that cause Homer and Elsie and Albert, and not the rooster. The rooster's, he's there for a different reason. But anyway, they cause trouble. And actually, as these stories were told to me over the years, I heard about these criminals, different ones, and I decided for the book purposes, I just make them the same characters. And so it's Slick and Huddy. But it turns out that a lot of the readers just really love this pair. They're hapless. They're hapless criminals. They never get anything quite right. They think they're really evil, but they don't even know what that means. And so they're just like the perfect foils for Homer and Elsie to go up against. The two men stopped and peered at Homer and then Albert. "It is not us," Slick said. "Stop lying, Slick. I recognize you. What are you doing on this boat?" Slick and Huddy looked at one another, and then Slick answered, "We can't make an honest living robbing banks or blowing up sock mills or betting on baseball games, so we decided to go to the sea and seek our fortune." They'd been thwarted by all those things by Homer and Elsie in chapters before. "I thought you got money from young Mrs. Feldman," Homer said. That's the rich man's young wife who cheated Elsie out of her money. We did, but it was took by the sheriff after he arrested us for stealing that hearse. We can't catch a break." Despite all their criminality, Homer felt a little sad for Slick and Huddy. They obviously had poor juju. "You must live beneath an unlucky star," he said. "Quite honestly, I believe our bad luck is knowing you and that alligator," Slick said. "You both therefore have to die. Huddy, let us take care of business." Huddy nodded, and both men raised their machetes and came forward. Homer blocked the first swipe of Huddy's blade with his mop handle, but then the giant raised his machete for a killing blow. Homer, his back to the sea, had no choice but to dive into the water. After he plunged in, he heard another splash and saw Albert had joined him. Slick and Huddy were left behind on the Theodosia to helplessly wave their machetes and curse, both of which they accomplished with exceeding zeal. Albert swam over and Homer grabbed hold of him, and then both watched until the two boats, smuggler and federal cutter, drifted out of sight. The sun began to set amid a burst of flamboyant pinks and purples and blues, and Homer drew Albert closer, fearful of spending another night on a dark, cold, and dangerous sea. But then a distant hull drew nearer, and found them. It was the Dorothy, whose captain, first mate, and supercargo named Elsie and a rooster with no name had come after their orphans and miraculously found them, coal miner and reptile, which was followed by great rejoicing by some, but not all. Now that last paragraph I just read, when I first wrote it, it was full of a lot more hoopty-doodle, because I based it on the last paragraph of the rather famous book that English teachers and American lit teachers insist on teaching in their classes rather than Rocket Boys if they should teach, or maybe even carrying Albert, but my editor at William Murrow didn't really recognize that final paragraph from that famous book that's got a big white animal in it and kind of chase ships. I think you get it. Anyway, she didn't recognize that I had actually cribbed from that famous novel in my own way. "Oh, this is awful, Homer. I just, this is terrible. Much too much hoopty-doodle." And so I pulled back a little bit. If you want to go find that famous novel and read the last paragraph, see how it still kind of relates to it. It was the Dorothy, whose captain first mate and supercargo named Elsie and a rooster with no name had come after their orphans and miraculously found them, coal miner and reptile, which was followed by great rejoicing by some, but not all. Chapter 35. Elsie sought out Grace in the morning, finding her, as always, in her room. The sun had penetrated the parted curtains behind her, and she seemed but a shining wisp in the streaming light. "You are leaving," she said, before Elsie could open her mouth. "Yes," Elsie said, "I am here to say goodbye, Grace, and to thank you for showing me how to properly run a boarding house." Elsie looked past the woman toward the swash, which was a shimmer with sunlight. "My God, how I love this place." "Yet you are going." Elsie rushed to explain. "It is clear I have broken Captain Bob's heart. I don't want to continue to cause him pain. That, and he has put Homer ashore, and just won't allow him to work as a fisherman anymore." Grace cocked her head and said, "Homer could work on other boats, and my brother could be contained. He is a good man, although lonely, but another woman will come along for him by and by. No, Elsie, I believe you are leaving because you know it is time for you to go. Your journey is not yet complete. There is much for you to see and do before you can return." Elsie's eyes were wet and her voice choked with emotion. She hated to leave, but knew she must for the very reasons Grace had said. "Do you think I will ever come back?" she asked her friend. "Of course. But before you go, I think you should walk the beach, the big beach, not the one on the Sound, and contemplate what will come, and what it is that will bring you back to this place when the time is right." "Oh, I will," Elsie cried. She moved forward to give Grace a farewell hug. Grace held up her hands and backed away. "Please understand, it is not proper to embrace me, for my condition makes me untouchable. But it is time for you to turn about and go. Know that I shall be watching you as time goes by and waiting for you to return. Some day, Elsie, you and I will walk the big beach together, the one that goes all the way to the tip of the peninsula. Do you understand? Now give us a smile and be off." Elsie gave Grace the requested smile and went off, thence to climb into the Buick, which was, at Captain Oscar's insistence, loaded up with food and drink in the trunk. In the back seat, Albert slept in the washtub lined by Homer's mother's quilt, and the rooster sat on the alligator's head. On Homer's side of the car stood Captain Oscar, who wore a sad smile. On Elsie's side was Rose, who was crying softly, her tears dripping into the sand. "Well, goodbye, goodbye," Captain Oscar said. Rose leaned in the window and wrapped her thin arms around Elsie. "I shall miss you forever," she said. Elsie hugged her tight. "I hope you'll be here when I come back." "She will if I have anything to say about it," Captain Oscar said. "This place couldn't operate without Rose." Rose ducked her head and smiled. "Thank you, Captain. I will stay and work for you as long as you will have me." Homer shook Captain Oscar's hand and turned to his wife. "Well, Elsie," he said, "let's get going if we're going." Elsie and Rose shared another hug, and then Rose stepped back and looked away while trying unsuccessfully to hide the awful sadness on her face and her unabated tears. "Look after Grace, honey," Elsie said to her. "She acts like she doesn't need anything, but she enjoys conversation, I think." "Wait just a minute," Captain Oscar said. He stared at Elsie with an expression of dismay. "What did you just say about Grace?" Elsie was confused by the anxious manner in which the captain asked the question. "Just that Rose should look after her," she answered. "You've been talking to Grace?" "Nearly every day since I've been here." Captain Oscar took off his cap and worried it between his hands. "Elsie, my daughter has been dead for 3 years." Elsie looked into the captain's eyes and saw that he was not joking. She looked through the Buick's back window and saw the faint outline of a human figure in Grace's bedroom. "I'm sorry, Captain," she said in an attempt to comfort him. "I have always been told I have an overactive imagination. Of course, I couldn't have possibly talked to her." Captain Oscar looked back at the house. Whether he saw the figure in the window, Elsie didn't know. He reached across Homer and grasped Elsie's hand, then let it go. "I wish you'd stay," he said. "I just can't," Elsie replied evenly. "Grace said She took a breath. I have come to understand I'm on a journey that is more than a journey. It has to have an end, and this isn't it. Not yet, anyway. Homer, not understanding anything of this, pressed the gas pedal and drove to the highway. I need to go to the beach, Elsie said before he could make the turn. Homer looked as if he wanted to argue, but then turned in the direction of the sea. Whatever you want, he said quietly. At the beach, Elsie got out of the Buick and took off her shoes. Wait here, she said, dropping the shoes onto the floorboard. Without looking back at Homer, she threaded a path through the sea oats to the ocean's waves and the vast strand of sand that went for miles until it ended at the tip of a peninsula. Elsie breathed in the tangy sea air. She walked to the water's edge, picked up a shark's teeth and sea glass. When she felt someone beside her, she thought it was Homer, but when she looked up, it was Grace. Startled, Elsie dropped the teeth in the glass. Why are you here? I love the beach. No, Elsie said. I mean, why are you here? You mean, why am I not in heaven? Yes, I am, Elsie. And when the time comes, this will be your heaven too. Elsie took a deep breath and watched the seagulls wheeling overhead and sandpipers running across the sand. On the horizon of the otherwise crystal blue sea, puffy white clouds lay like strewn cotton balls. God, she thought, it's so beautiful. I want to be here forever. She turned to tell Grace how she felt, but discovered she was alone again. When she turned around, she saw only one set of footsteps, her own. Pushing any thoughts out of her head except the beauty of all that surrounded her, she stood for a while, looking out to sea, then followed her footprints until she reached the Buick. She pulled open the door, waking Homer up. Did you see anyone else on the beach? He asked as Elsie sat down on the front seat and pulled the door closed. She shook her head. Are you ready to go to Florida? Elsie nodded. Are you all right? No. What can I do? You can drive. The rooster jumped up and nestled on Homer's shoulder, and Albert, coming away, provided his yeah, happy sound. Homer, still without a map, drove to the nearest highway, put the sun on his left, and headed tenaciously south. That's the end of that part. The next is part 6, How Albert Flew, and which takes place in Georgia. And then another favorite part of mine after, well, they're all favorite, needless to say, but I really enjoyed writing part 7. I had a lot of fun. How Homer and Elsie saved the movie and Albert played a crocodile. So that's the final chapters that I'm going to read from Carrying Albert Home. But I would, this has been kind of fun. And if any of you out there hearing this has another one of my mini books that you would like for me to read some chapters from, just let me know. Go out on Facebook or Twitter or wherever. HomerHickam.com. You can go out there and email us through there. And just let me know what the next book you'd like to hear a few chapters from. And I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. We're going to get through all of this, folks. We've been through, some of us older folks have been through all of this before, one way or the other. Of course, during my era, we had Vietnam that we didn't think was ever going to end. That just tore the nation apart. Some men running off to Canada because they hated the war. Some of us who hated the war still went to war and did what we could do. And it was just a really bad period. So we went through all of that. And then there was the Cold War that it looked like for the longest time the Russians were going to win the Cold War. It went on and on and on and on. 2 nuclear superpowers with intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, planes constantly flying in the air, loaded with atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, just needed one signal, and they were on their way for mutual annihilation. And there's the cat, Yellowsy, that I was telling you. It'd probably be meowing. After, thank goodness, President Reagan came along and called the Russians bluff and Next thing we knew, it's still hard to believe it that it's over. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union collapsed. Communism finally got chased out of that country. Yes, the Russians are still, they're very blustery, but they're nothing like they were when it was the Soviet Union and it was their intention to take over the world. So that seemed like it was going to go on and on and on. And it affected all of us to know that at any moment nuclear weapons could come raining down on top of us. But yet we got through it, and yet in the end we won out. The good folks do seem to win. When I went to work for NASA, of course, we had the Challenger accident. I knew most of the crew, and it just tore us apart. And yet we got back to work, and we got flying again. And then, well, you can go all the way back to Apollo 1 with the moon landings. Apollo 1, where we lost 3 crewmen. Burned up in their capsule on the ground, a horribly designed piece of equipment, and I wasn't working for NASA at that time. I was over in doing the Vietnam thing, but we came back and met John Kennedy's requirement, the stirring speech that he gave for us to we're going to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And we did it. We did it. And then later on came the Columbia. By then, I was full-time author. I'd retired from NASA, but it was pretty clear that just with Challenger that we were going to come back, and we did. And we recognized along the line that it was time to retire the shuttle. And of course, I'm against with what happened, but now I'm really, really enthusiastic about the new space program with Blue Origin and SpaceX and all these new entrepreneurial companies coming and creating things. And we're going to go back to the moon and do the other things. We definitely are, not only in space, but everywhere. That's a great thing about this country. We can just do anything. We put our mind to it, and we can just do anything. And we've been arguing a lot in the last few years, and I know a lot of people don't like President Trump and my good friend Vice President Pence, but in fact I believe they're doing the best that they can do. It may not be the best possible, but they're doing the best that they can do. And I think right now with this thing that we're involved in, we need to get behind them, support them. Republican or Democrat, come on, we got to fight this thing and get this behind us, and we will. We definitely will. So I hope everybody out there will let's just all pull together, and if it means sitting at home and listening to Homer rattle on with for no apparent reason, a rooster. Well, there is apparent reason, clearly. He's in the book, and then trying to my class over here, and then Albert, sweet Albert. Albert's going to fly in the next chapter, but you'll have to buy the book or go to the library. Well, you can't even go to the library right now. That's all right. It's going to get over with very, very soon. And anyway, as Americans, we're all going to pull together. And as human beings, we're all going to pull together. I mean, I'm worried about people we know over in Italy and France. We know a bunch of them. And, of course, in the United Kingdom, oh gosh, that's where my roots are from. And we got, great publisher of our books in all those countries. And so, and by the way, I spent time in Russia and love the Russian people. They're great people. They just can't seem to get this. It's not democracy, but we're a republic. We're not a democracy. They just can't quite grasp this and make it work. Someday they will, because they are very, very smart people, and they're very good people, and they're loving people. They pull their families together. That's what I really admire about them. And they also have a good sense of humor about everything. And no matter how bad things get, somehow the Russians can make a joke out of it and pull together. Anyway, I've rattled on. Love you all, and thank you for listening. And let me know what book you'd like for me to read next. And you know what? I'll do it. Thanks.